Hello, welcome to the LISA HORTON CRAFTS YouTube channel. My name's Claire Newcombe. Today I'll be using the multi-layer Anemone stamp set. We have layering stencils, with coordinating stamps and dies, making this a complete set for you to create an entire project. And I wanted to show you how to create a white flower. So to begin with, I'm going to create the larger of the flowers. There are a number of ways of doing this. You can either stamp your flower first and then use your layering dies to colour that, or you don't have to use the stamps at all. You can create the image just by using your stencils straight onto your cardstock. I shall be using the stencils first, and then I will line up my stamp over the top and create the outline image. So as with all of LISA's layering stencil system, the layered stencils have the numbers in the corner to tell you in which order to use them. Now, depending on which set you buy, the numbers could also be in this corner. So just make sure before you start that you've located all the numbers and they are all in the same position. Now, as I mentioned before, I wanted to show you how to create a white flower. And just looking back at the card here, you'll see that the layers of this flower aren't white, but if you use lighter colours like light greys, light beiges, and just use them really gently within your stencil, you create the shadow, so you give the illusion of the flower itself actually being white. So the colours I'll be using in the distress ink will be Hickory Smoke and Black Soot. Those will be for the petals. So for the green on the flower, I'll be using a mixture of Forest Moss and Rustic Wilderness. And I'll be using a tiny little bit of colour also, just to lift the flower and make it reminiscent of the white poppies that you'd perhaps see in the garden. I shall be adding a tiny little bit of candied apple, a nice red for the centre of the flower. So the first layer of the flower is the largest, and I just want to lay down a really faint layer of Hickory Smoke, just to give a hint of a shadow. So using LISA's blending brushes, I'm going for the smaller ones because I don't want to cover the whole area. I do want to keep as much white cardstock within the petals as I can, so I should just be using these smaller brushes, taking a small amount of ink, and I shall just be flicking that ink in from the edges, from the stencil into the aperture there. So you really don't want to overload this, and initially it's not going to look as if there's an awful lot happening. So just add the grey just gently around the outside of this larger flower. For this particular card, I'm not too bothered by using the outside elements here. Now, the advantage of using LISA's Ultimate and therefore the peg system means that I can just remove this stencil and just let you see just how little ink I've placed down onto the paper there. And I know with confidence that replacing that stencil back onto the peg system, that I'm still lined up with my design on the card. So coming in with a little bit of the green, I'm just going to highlight the buds and the stems. I'm going to start off with a little bit of Forest Moss, tap off the excess ink and just work that into the design there. It's always best to add a little bit of colour and layer up, as opposed to adding too much all at once and not being able to take that away. First layer done. Coming in with stencil number 2. We can go a little bit darker with the green, using Forest Moss again, layering the same colour on top of a light colour, adds a lovely tone on tone. Adding the same colour over I'm adding a little bit of Rustic Wilderness, just flicking that into a section of that stencil to create some depth. Now I go back to the hickory smoke and use my blending brush, and again I can just start flicking some of that ink into the apertures there on the stencil. I think the key to creating a white flower with this technique is to not completely colour block through each of the apertures on each of the stencils. We want to just create a hint of a shadow, and that way we won't be overpowering the floral with too much dark. Coming in with stencil number 3, we take a slightly different tack because we have the centre of the flower here, which I want to be quite dark and prominent. So I will actually come in with black soot for the centre, and I will actually be quite heavy-handed with that colour in the centre and catch a lot of the detail around that central part of the flower there. I don't want to go in with black soot with the rest of the details. I shall carry on adding what's left of the ink on my brush through that stencil. So before we remove stencil number 3, I'm going to use one of the very small detail brushes from Lisa Horton, some Candied Apple, and just pick up a very small amount, a tiny amount. Blot off the excess ink on a spare part of the stencil and just start blending that into the centre of the flower and the surrounding detail there. If I remove that now, you will see that there is just a very faint hint of colour. You can go back in and add more, and I think it's just that tiny amount of colour just lifts that flower. So coming in with the last stencil, we have a lot more detail. Again, we pick up some of the hickory smoke and we just flick into those areas of the stencil again. We have details left on the leaf, so again I can come in with my smaller brush, add a little bit more detail in green. To really highlight the edges of this flower, we can come in with this stamp, and now we can use our Ultimate tool as a stamping press. Take your time to line up the stamp to the stenciled image if that's the way that you have worked. Pick up your stamp. I'm going to use a light grey colour. Again, take your time to line up the die to your image. You have a gorgeous die cut stenciled flower. Now to create the background of the card, I have used one other set, one of Lisa's early sets, the background collection, the texture stamps, just to add some detail and some texture in the back. Plus I will stencil one more element from the Anemone set into the background. With my super smooth cardstock by Lisa, so I just want to create a strip, a highlight strip through the centre. So I'm going to take some copy paper, just tear it. So using the torn sections of the copy paper here, I'm just going to mask off a strip across the centre of the background card there. That is where I want to add my detailing. Using the same colours as I did in the flower, so that keeps the coordination of the colours. I'll just use a little bit of hickory smoke, one of my small brushes, and just very gently again, just flick from the copy paper onto your background card, and this will just create an incredibly faint line and almost like a belt across your backing card there. Again, this will be very faint, but it will all become clear once you remove this copy paper mask. There, so we can see the area where we want to add some detail. So using the script stamp from the textures collection, I'm going to replace my mask because I only want the script to be stamped within that area. Coming back to my light grey ink, I ink the stamp, and then onto the copy paper first, I just take away the majority of that ink before stamping onto my background card. I want that to be very faint in the background. So I stamp again for the second time, blot again for the second time, just re-stamp the remaining area. Now we can remove our mask. Now we need to stencil this smaller flower into the background, directly onto the background. Now to do this, we want to have this flower positioned just there. Now if I were to put this on the peg system, as I was before, my flower then can be positioned just there, and it's just means that my card is just sitting off the ultimate, which is, for this particular, isn't too bad. I'd be able to work with that. But what I wanted to show you is that you don't always need to use the pegs just here. If you were working with a larger piece of card, that may not have been a feasible option. So what I just want to do, I just want to use the outlines of the ultimate just to square up that stencil into the corner there, and then position my cardstock underneath where I'd like my flower, just there. Now I can anchor my cardstock using the magnets provided, so that won't be going anywhere. My stencil can be replaced because I know that it's sitting square in the corner, and I have my number up in the top corner there. So as long as I replace each of the stencils with a number sitting up there, I know that my stencils will line up. And I'll just show you this just to prove that you don't always need to use the peg system. There we have beautiful blended flowers into the background of the card. To continue adding some detail into the background here, again I'm using the texture stamp collection. I should be using this ink splat stamp. I shan't be mounting it on a block, I just want to use the central section here, which will give me a nice mottled effect. I shall use some hickory smoke I just bend the stamp, and I just press that down, the centre of that down onto the ink pad, so onto the hickory smoke. I shall blot off the colour onto some copy paper, and you can see there just how faint that stamping is. So we blot that off, and we just add little random areas of stamping just to soften that belt across. I shall do the same with the forest moss. Again, this time I will blot off a good couple of times, because in doing that you'll see each time the ink fades, and it's this really faded look that I really want to see. So I'll blot off twice onto copy paper, then start adding this to the background of the card. This is what is known as first, second, third, fourth generation stamping. So the first generation will be the first stamp, second generation second, and so on. And you can see that is what gives us like the paint splat look, like the grungy look, the nice relaxed look for your backgrounds. Just to add a little variation, I shall be using this stamp once or twice, again with the forest moss. I've put that stamp on a block this time, I shall blot off the majority of the ink, and we shall just stamp that possibly just once there, and that gives us a little bit of variation in the background. Now that in itself I think is beautiful. You could just add a sentiment there and then that would be a really lovely simple card. So we can add our flower. I've added foam pads to the back. We can just position that just there. Now the beauty of this set is that Lisa has included sentiments for us with some lovely fonts. So I should be using the Happy Birthday stamp already mounted on a block. I like to stamp directly onto my card, like so. Just as a design feature, I just like to add a little bit of grade card there. And this ties it into the matten layers on the card base and gives me a position to mount some gems. So you can see that using just one set, you can make an entire project, perhaps with the addition of some inks and perhaps the textured background stamps, plus the versatility of using Lisa's Ultimate tool to make the stenciling a lot easier for you. You can create a beautiful project. Hope you've enjoyed watching today and hope I've given you some inspiration. Don't forget to subscribe to Lisa's channel and hit the notifications button so that you won't miss out on any new videos that get uploaded. Until next time.